I talked a little bit about coming into the Catholic Church later in life, and even though my faith background was closer to Catholic Church than probably most people that grew up Protestant, there were some things that I struggled with. And the thing probably I struggled with the most, and still kind of do from time to time, is one of the doctrines the Church teaches about Mary, and that is the Immaculate Conception. And I'm not going to go into why that is tonight, but I bring it up as only to say, when you make your profession of faith, or when you are baptized into the church, or when you make your profession of faith and are received into the full communion of the church, it's okay if you're not, you don't have to be absolutely down with every last thing that's in the catechism. Frankly, you're not going to know all the things that are in there anyways. None of us knows all of them. But if you're struggling with some things, that's not necessarily a barrier to coming in. All you're really saying is you're open. You agree to conform your will to the teaching of the church, and you're open to it. But in my case, I was still struggling with a couple things, and one of the Mary things in particular. But that's not what I'm going to talk about tonight. So if we're going to talk about Mary and why the church is so big on Mary, you really have to start with the Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So let's start with the Gospels. Now, if Mark was our only Gospel that we had, what would we know about Mary? If all we had was Mark's Gospel, we would know that Mary stood outside the synagogue with Jesus' siblings asking for him when he was in there teaching. We would know that. We would know that her name was Mary and that she was well known to people in Nazareth. And that's it. In Mark's Gospel, that's all we know. So if Mark was our only Gospel, that's really all we would know about Mary. If John was our only Gospel, what would we know about Mary from John's Gospel? We would know that she goaded him into performing the first of his signs, now one of the luminous mysteries, the changing the water into wine at the wedding of Cana. So we would know about her from that. We would know that she traveled with him, at least at the start of his ministry, that she traveled with him. We would know that she was the wife of Joseph. And we would know that she was at the foot of the cross when Jesus was crucified. And that's all we would know. We wouldn't even know her name, because she's never named in John's Gospel. She's mentioned, but never named. So if John's our only Gospel, we wouldn't even know her name. How about Matthew's Gospel? What would we know about Mary if Matthew was our only Gospel? We would know that she was named Mary, and we would know that she was the wife of Joseph. We would know that she became pregnant out of wedlock. We would know that she lived in a house in Bethlehem. We would know that she fled to Egypt and returned then to Nazareth. And that's all we would know if Matthew was our only Gospel. So that's not much. If you add those three up together, that's not much. So if we want to know about Mary, we have to turn to Luke's Gospel. And that's where we're going to focus tonight to see what the Gospels, or Luke's Gospel in particular, has to say about Mary, because Luke has really quite a lot to say about Mary. So we're going to start there. So the first thing that Luke tells us about Mary is that she is called. Now think for a moment what's being said to her. This is, everybody recognize this scene? The angel Gabriel is coming to Mary and saying, "You have found favor with God. You will conceive a child." Now, what's Mary's response? Does anybody remember? What is Mary's response to this? Her response is, "How can I conceive a child because I haven't ever, okay. All right. So what happens to a woman in Mary's time and place who gets pregnant out of wedlock? Yeah, stoned and not in the way. Right, okay. Okay, in the bad way. And yet, what does the angel tell her? You found favor. You found favor with God. And so now, God is going to put you in a situation that could be fatal to you because he favors you. Your life is now going to be completely in his hands. So a call to discipleship is never a call to go farther back into your comfort zone. A call to discipleship is always a call out of your comfort zone. So we can say it this way. When God calls you out, he really calls you out. So what does Mary say in response to this when she understands now what the deal is? Well, this is what she says right here. So, okay. And what does this tell us about being a disciple? When God calls you, a response is expected. When people asked Jesus when Jesus was calling people to follow him and they asked for deferrals, remember what some of them said? Oh, I have to bury my father. What was Jesus' response? Leave the dead to bury the dead. That's right. And so, as far as Mary could have foreseen, her yes to God was the acceptance of a death penalty. And stoning is not at all a pleasant way to go. But she said yes anyway. And as Luke is showing us here in this episode, that's what we ought to do. That's the best answer to give to God. Now, when Mary visits her cousin Elizabeth, her situation is recognized by Elizabeth before Mary even says anything. Elizabeth knows what's going on and sees. What does this tell us about being a disciple? When you're a disciple, people notice. There's a great speaker, Jeff Cavins, and he's done many wonderful things, and if you get a chance to hear him, I encourage you to do it. But he says, whenever somebody says to me, "You remind me of somebody," he goes, "Jesus?" Which maybe sometimes they say, that's what they say, yes. Yes, that's who they remind him of. But the point is this. When you're a disciple, people should notice. If you're being a good disciple, people should take notice of that. Discipleship is something you can wear on your sleeve, not something you need to hide away. Twice during the birth narrative in Luke, and we'll talk more about Luke's birth narrative in a few weeks when I ruin Christmas for everybody. But twice during Luke's birth narrative, after the shepherds leave and after Jesus is found in the temple, we're told that Mary kept these things, reflecting on them in her heart. So what does that tell us about being a disciple?
We don't always understand.
Okay, so what does that mean we ought to do?
Have faith.
Okay, and what else? Faith and what's the other side of the coin? Faith and reason? If we don't understand something, what should we do? What did Mary do? Reflect on it. Okay, what kind of life is that? Disciples are called to live an examined life. Okay, we embrace the experiences that God sends our way. We take the time to ponder, to internalize them, and to find meaning in them. We did a little bit of that the last couple of weeks with the Lectio Divina, the prayer that we did the last couple of weeks, where what word popped out to you and why do you think that what was God trying to say to you through that word? That's another example there of living an examined life. That's the kind of life that a disciple lives. When Mary brings the infant Jesus to the temple, that was one of the, anybody remember one of the which mysteries is that?
Joyful.
Very good. Joyful. You could be a good Catholic, Sarah. When Mary brings the infant Jesus to the temple, Simeon, as Jerry told us, a righteous and devout man, Luke tells us that the Holy Spirit was upon him, upon Simeon. And Simeon gives a prophecy. And his prophecy to Mary is this: "And you yourself a sword shall pierce." When Mary brings the coming of age Jesus to Jerusalem, he lingers behind, causing her great worry. That was also another one of the which mysteries? Joyful mysteries, finding of Jesus in the temple. He lingers behind, causing her great worry. And what is his response to her worry when they are finally reunited? It's a somewhat precocious, where did you expect me to be? Where did you think I would be? Luke recounts, as do actually Mark and Matthew on this episode, how Mary and Jesus' siblings tried to gain access to him during his ministry. And Jesus, when he's informed that his family is out there wanting to see him, what's his response? What's his reply? I'll give you a hint. It's right there. Okay? Who are my mother and my brothers? Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. He practically disowns them. John, as we saw earlier, depicts Mary at the foot of the cross, though not by name, watching her son's last agonizing moments. What do these episodes tell us about discipleship?
It's not always an easy road.
Exactly. We're going to be called to make sacrifices. It's not always going to be pleasant. Probably wasn't always pleasant for those monks memorizing all 150 Psalms. Sacrifices will be called, just as Jesus was called to make a sacrifice. We will be called as disciples to make sacrifices, and we must be willing to make them. So, in Luke's account of Mary, what do we see? We see Luke through these series of episodes showing us through Mary what? What it takes to be a disciple. So Mary is really presented to us as the first disciple. The first disciple. That's why the church reveres her. That's why the church honors her. She is presented to us in that way. She was the first disciple and an example for us of what discipleship entails and how we ought to approach it ourselves. And that's why Mary's a big deal in the church, because she is the very first disciple. Now, in Luke's account of the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, which is one of the what mysteries? Glorious. Okay, Mary is counted among those present. So she is, as much as the 12, a model of discipleship within the early Christian community. Can anybody, this is a bonus question here. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture? This is Pentecost. This is the descent of the Holy Spirit. You can see the Spirit represented here by their auras or halos. What's wrong with this picture? How many people are in there?
It's hard to see. Is there one hidden back there? Is it 12 or 13?
There's one missing.
Count the little tongues as of fire. You got Mary.
Yeah.
And then you've got how many others?
11.
11. Why is there only 11? Because Judas, of course, right? But when does the Pentecost happen?
After the resurrection.
And what happens between the resurrection and Pentecost?
And they choose a
Is
replacement.
they choose a replacement. Who is who? Matthias. Matthias. So poor Matthias, maybe this was painted before they named Matthias. I don't think so. Poor Matthias gets left out. There should have been 12 there. Actually, if you read Luke chapter 2 and the description of the Pentecost, there were more than just the 12 and Mary there. But anyway, so we'll give them a little artistic license there. And so Luke uses Mary throughout his writings then as a model of discipleship for us.